Any comment, observations about those five? Oh, Gary? Sorry, you're on mute, Gary.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. My observation is that I agree with you, Tim, what you said earlier. You've got to use nearly every one of those and probably one more at certain stages of negotiation. And I suppose that's where it all depends on where you are on the ladder of corporate life or business life.
Yes.
Like you're, a general manager, a manager, or an owner. So,
Yes.
that's where I find, sometimes you're looking for that sixth, direction as well. But no, I found it I found that quite well presented. I thought that was very well done.
Mm. Yeah, and thanks, Gary. You were cutting out a bit there, so hopefully our connection's okay. But and that might be from my end. Who knows? But none of those five are the solution to every single conflict that you and I have. And the trap that all of us will fall into is we will deal with things according to what we prefer, and that's a trap because that makes us less effective. Stop plan A and go onto a plan B or C or D or whatever. And that is really the key to all of this. And it's hard because if you're used to, for example, being quite competitive, then sometimes it's hard to stop and listen to the other point of view. Or if, for example, you are very much into building good working relationships up with people and that's your thing, it's going to be hard for you occasionally to say no. So we've all got these things, and what this session's all about is just making us aware and giving an opportunity to think, well, this isn't working, so maybe there's another way of looking at it. That's the key there. So thanks, Gary. Anyone else got a comment before we launch into this in a bit more detail?
I think what you said, Tim, about consider my preferences and consider their preferences, and then the situation. I'd probably add, you've also said, and their style and my style, because people are naturally more assertive or not, naturally more expressive or not. I always, in trying to work out how do we move forward if there is conflict, I like to ask, have I got this right? And try and summarize what I'm perceiving, and then get them to tell me, have I understood it correctly or not? Often in asking them to re-express it, we move away from the block point.
I think the only thing that any of us can do here is that if we go into and remember, conflict could be anything. It's not necessarily a negative thing. It's just a difference of viewpoint. And of course, if we notice the glaze goes in people's eyes and we're not getting anywhere, then what I'm hoping you might do as a result of this is just stop and think, well, hang on, this isn't working.
Yeah.
What's plan B? That's ultimately what this is about. So it actually means that you become more effective at what you're trying to do, which is, of course, and it's not always about winning a conflict. Sometimes it's actually about letting the other person have it their way, and then you get the brownie points for that, and you hopefully they will cooperate with you downstream. So there's all sorts of things that are involved in that. So let's actually go back to the slides for a moment. I'll just explain to you a little more about this. Oops, don't want that. Okay, moving on. Oh, there we go. Now, if we let's look at competing first. So we'll go through each one. You might like to refer to your profile if you've done it, and think about this for a moment. Now, remember, competing is high on assertion and low on cooperativeness. So the question might be, when would you use this? Well, when you need to make a quick decision. So you just don't have time to collaborate. You don't have time to discuss things. You have to just make a decision. And coming back to Gary's point, often leaders are in the position where they just have to make a decision and get on with it. Now, obviously, you don't want to do that too often, as in if you're not consulting with people when you should or when they think you should, then that's a problem. But the interesting thing about this is that team members actually expect you at times to just make the decision. So they're quite understanding about that. When they get upset about that is when they feel that maybe they should have been consulted and they weren't. So definitely speed is a key. Another one is, I guess, when people aren't cooperating with you or they're trying to take advantage of you, your goodwill. Let's say you're coming to the conversation with a lot of goodwill, and it seems like someone's just riding roughshod over you and they're not listening to what you've got to say. So you've tried to, create that cooperative atmosphere and it's not working. So you might have to be firm, respectful, and just say, this is my perspective, or I disagree with you. I have a different point of view. So definitely in those cases. The other thing is when you've got to make an unpopular decision in your business or businesses, sometimes it's better just to make it. There's no point in trying to sugarcoat it and sort of, make out that you're consulting with people when the decision's already been made. People aren't silly. They'll work that out very quickly. So I think sometimes it's best just to say to people, look, this is not going to be a popular decision, but we have to make it because of X. And I think in those cases, people mightn't like the decision, but at least they understand that they're probably going to be more respectful of you jumping in and doing it rather than just pretending to involve people in the decision when it's already been decided. So that's definitely an opportunity. Now, accommodating is the opposite. You'll notice it's over here. So this is where you are being very cooperative and not very assertive. So we might call this a lose-win. This is a win-win. This is a lose-win. So this is where you let the other person win. Now, when would you do that? Well, if the relationship's more important than the issue, and those of us in personal relationships would understand that if we're going to continue the relationship, there's a time and a place. We're just going to have to, to dig in and have a point of view that's counter to the other person may not be a good idea from the relationship point of view. We all probably know that. So if you're thinking this could actually fracture the working relationship, then it might be one reason to do that. Another reason to do that is you just can't get your needs met. There's no way you're not going to get what you want out of this. So it's probably better just not to even concern yourself about it. Let the other person have it their way, because obviously you'd be wasting your time otherwise. And I think the other thing is, if it's not very important to you, now, I think in the workplace, there's so many bun fights that we can be involved in if we choose to be. And I think we've got to pick our mark. I'm sure you'd agree. And there are some things that are just not worth dying in a ditch over. And maybe that's just something that we might accommodate on for the simple reason that it's not worth the effort to assert a point of view there. So that's the opposite. And now you've got to be careful with this, because somebody that's always competing will probably find that other people will do one of two things. They will either be quite aggressive with you because they'll assume that that's the only way they can get their needs met, or they won't bother talking to you because they think, what's the point? You've already decided what's going on. You see how your profile can actually affect the way other people deal with you. Now, with accommodating, if you're always accommodating, then people will have two kind of responses to you. One might be that they will be quite aggressive because they know that they can probably get their own way if they push a little bit harder. Or the other side of it is that they might be very much to the point and And so you're kind of wondering why they are the way they are. It's probably because they know that if they just push a bit harder, they'll get their way. So you see your profile will interesting enough, because people know your profile. They don't know what you did during this program, but they work out pretty quickly what your style is. And so they will treat you according to how they see you. So you see, you create a bit of a rod for your own back if you're not versatile. The very best thing that someone can say to you, if I asked them, and I said, well, what style, is Jareen? And someone says, I don't know. Sometimes she competes, sometimes she collaborates, sometimes, so in other words, they can't quite work it out because you're versatile enough to make it, to be versatile, basically. So when would you avoid? Avoiding sounds like a terrible thing to do. But let's be honest, if we didn't avoid some things, we'll never get anything done. So how would diplomacy. So let's say, for example, that somebody in a meeting says something that's slightly inaccurate, and you think that if I correct them, it's probably going to get their back up and they won't listen to my point of view, which is critical here, then you might just let it go through to the keeper. And so, sometimes it's not always a good thing to correct people when it's going to affect the capacity for them to listen to what you've got to say. So that might be one area. What about where you have to put a decision off? I think that often what happens is people are very clever and they pull you up in the hallway or the corridor or when you're going to a meeting and you're busy and you don't have time to process all the information that's in front of you because they've pulled you up at an inconvenient time. You're far better to say to the other person, leave it with me, I'll give it some thought, and then I'll come back to you. And that way, of course, it's not a fob off, you still have to get back to them. But by doing that, you're giving yourself time and space. So avoiding initially and then coming back later is a good strategy on something complex where you've been caught in an unguarded moment. Another thing is that neither the relationship or the issue is important to you. Let it go. I mean, at the end of the day, as I said earlier, you can't get involved in every bun fight around the place, and nor should you. So you just go with the things that are important and let the other things go. So you might just avoid those things. Let me give you an example of that. Let's say that two of your team members are having a mild altercation, and you think to yourself, they're grown adults, they should be able to work out their issues between them, so I'll avoid it. That's what you're thinking, because they, I don't think I should get involved, and they will. But then what happens is they get louder and louder, and it's very obvious to you that you cannot avoid it any longer. So you might call them into a space, a private space, and you'll have a conversation with them both. And you will ask each person to make some sort of a compromise. And they won't. Their arms are crossed, their eyes are crossed. They think they're right. They think the other person's wrong. And they both think that way. So that's not working. Then you might collaborate and say, are you two willing to work with me to sort this out so that we can three of us can move on? And again, they're not flexible enough to do that. I've now tried 3 approaches. And as their team leader or their leader, I can then say to them, well, this is what's going to happen. So I now can move into competing, knowing that the other 3 hadn't worked. That's the style of thing that I'm on about. Now, hopefully, one of those 4 things will work eventually, and you can use competing as a last resort. And as I said earlier, if there's something that you need to know more about, then don't feel you've got to answer people's questions. Take it on notice and go and do your own homework and then come back to them. And then it'll be a far more considered response because you've now had a chance to think about it, because people can be quite clever and pull you up at the most inconvenient time, hoping they can get a quick answer, a favourable answer, and you need to actually contemplate that. So let me stop for the moment and give you a chance to comment on those before I launch into the other two. So and look, the key thing is we are all going to make mistakes when we're dealing with conflict because we've got our natural biases. The good news about that is it's not the end. You just stop and think, this isn't working. Let me try plan B, as I said, or a plan C or a D. So this is all about making you more versatile when you're dealing with those differences of viewpoint in the workplace or with colleagues or with stakeholders. It can go anywhere for that matter. Any questions or comments at this stage?
My only question, Tim, is I've seen this model before. I actually just did it recently, but my conflict mode in my personal life is very different to my working life.
Yes.
Have you experienced that or seen it before? And is that normal? I guess is my question.
No, it's a good question, Natalia. Yes, it is normal. And usually, and we don't want to get into, this too deeply, but the reason these things can be different is that our beliefs, we've got values and beliefs around conflict and relationships and all of these things. And so they will govern out the way we will behave in certain situations. I'll give you a good example. And I'll give you a personal example. My case, I'm reasonably assertive with people that I know well. And my thinking in my head is, well, they trust me. They know who I am. They know that they know where I'm coming from. So it's okay for me to put my view on the table. Curiously enough, with strangers, I'm less assertive. My view there is, well, they don't know me. They don't know where I'm coming from. I need to, build that relationship up before. My wife is the exact opposite. She's very assertive with people she doesn't know and perhaps less so with people she knows. But these are things that are based on our own beliefs and so forth. So it's just good to actually think about why I'm different at home as I am at work. And there's usually a set of beliefs that are underpinning that helps. So it's not unusual at all.
Okay, that's good feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, let's launch into the others and then we'll give you some case studies to have a think about where the fun begins. So let me go here and let me go to the next slide. So a lot of people will confuse collaboration and compromise. There is a big difference here. So it looks on the surface that collaboration is the best approach. Why? Because it's high on assertion and high on cooperativeness. However, as they said in the video clip, the truth of the matter is we often don't get time to sort of engage in a conversation with people to come to a collaborative arrangement. So it's not always practical to do that in our busy working lives. But where you do have the opportunity to do that, yes, it can work extremely well. So when would you use it? If the situation and the relationship is critical, collaboration is the best way to go. Because if by having a conversation with someone else, if we can sometimes come up with a solution that will solve a problem and strengthen the working relationship. The second one is if the outcome, if an outcome must satisfy both parties. And we see this a lot in negotiation. So if two people have to be satisfied with the outcome, then pretty much the only way to do that is to discuss the differences of point of view and try and come to some sort of a resolution. That would be reasonable. Thirdly, when all parties need to be committed, as I said, to a solution that works, Now, the key word there is committed. You can't collaborate with somebody who isn't committed to collaborating with you. In other words, there's got to be something in it for them to want to spend that time discussing things with you. That's why the outcome has got to be important to both parties. And sometimes you'll get a better result by collaborating. Why? Because people can think of a creative way of solving an issue that hadn't been thought about before. Normally, when we're under pressure, what happens is our view of what's going on narrows. And so we often don't look beyond, what we're seeing, which is a narrow view. By collaborating, we can actually come up with a better solution. But the big downfall there, obviously, is the fact that it's going to take some time, because you've really got to talk that through with the other person. Maybe not just one conversation, maybe several. So if you've got the luxury of time and both parties are motivated to solve something, collaboration is the best way to go. Okay, last one, compromise. You might say, well, why is it in the middle? And the reason it's in the middle is that when you compromise with someone, that is, you give a little bit in order to get a little bit. So it's always about both parties making concessions. So therefore, it's halfway down the assertion scale, because sometimes you'll dig your heels in, other times you'll let the other person have it their way. It's also halfway down the cooperative scale, because you're not going to get everything that you want. But what you might get is a compromised solution, and that's okay, that's acceptable, but you're not going to get, so in other words, you're not going to be 100% cooperative when you're compromising with someone, because you're going to, for example, if you're buying a property or something, you're going to have a view, they'll have a view. It's normally not the same view, and what happens is sometimes we often meet in the middle somewhere. So you're not completely satisfied with the outcome, but you're not dissatisfied either. So when would you use it? Sometimes when time's running out. So for example, you might be working with someone and time runs out. So all of a sudden you say, righto, well, let's just make some concessions here. I'm willing to do this. What are you willing to do? So that can work well when collaboration's not working. Sometimes, as I said, when collaboration isn't working, you can launch into compromise. It can be a temporary fix. So, for example, you could say to someone, look, let's just compromise now. And after we get through this, let's get our heads together and see if we can come up with a solution that we're both 100% happy with. That's not a fob off. That's an opportunity to come back to it later on. But in the short term, because of the time constraints, we'll have to go with something. Fourthly, sometimes it's the only way. And I must admit that in the culture that we are in, you would say that compromise is a very acceptable way of dealing with conflict. So it's probably overused in our working environments when perhaps other approaches could be used. But, often we see it as a natural way of dealing with conflict, but it's not always the best solution. And that's the point I want to make with you, that, it's really depends on the circumstances that you're in and, all of the variables that we've talked about as to whether or not you compromise. So there's the 5 approaches. Now, this is just a very messy sort of, I'm not going to go through all this. The point I want to make is that each of these approaches has advantages and disadvantages. So just understand there is no one right way. There's probably a more appropriate way, depending on the situation and everything else, but understand there's always some, disadvantages for each approach. So to understand that being flexible is by far and away the most effective way of dealing with conflict. All right, just got to check in with everyone. Any questions, comments? I know it sounds easy on a screen, but I think if we can get this into our head, that just because, we have a style here or a style there, the right approach. And sometimes it means we need to try something new in order to get to where we need to go. And that's the key message I want you to get out of this morning's session, is that if it's not working, Don't keep banging your head against a brick wall because it'll get very sore. Try a plan B. And you might be pleasantly surprised at the way you're changing the dynamics. Don't expect the other person's going to do that because they're not necessarily, they have their own approach, they have their own style. So if you as the leader change the conversation, you're likely to get a better result as such. Okay. All right, let's look at some cases and give you a chance to look at these and see what you think. They're fairly typical cases. I've tried to make them generic enough. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the case, then I'm going to stop and ask you what you think you would do if you were put in this position. So, situation 1, a customer calls you. They want you to handle an order for him. You no longer work in that team, and it would cause a major problem internally if you cross departments. However, the customer who has used your services before is very insistent with you. So I'm in a dilemma. So the question that I want to ask you is, do you compete? Do you collaborate? Do you compromise? Do you avoid? Or do you accommodate? What do you think? What would be the most effective way of dealing with that? Natalia?
So I'm in it. Oh, sorry. Did Doreen say something? No.
No, you go.
I'm in between. I'm trying to think of what the 2 C's were.
Compromise.
Do you compromise and help them find the person that they need to speak to, or is that collaborating by working with them to help them find the person they need to speak to?
It's collaboration, because then, compromise is more watered down response. So collaboration is actually a problem-solving solution. So yeah, that would work, absolutely. So what you're saying is, you might say to the other person, look, I no longer work in that area, and there's going to cause some issues internally. So how about I introduce you to the key person, and then they can take it up with you. Now, they probably contacted you because they know you. They probably contacted you. They don't understand all the ins and outs of what's going on in the environment. So they don't know. So that could potentially work. Sorry, Jareen, did you want to say something regarding that?
No, it's good. I was thinking the same. It was between the two, collaborating or compromising.
Yeah. A process of elimination, if you look at the process of elimination, you can't avoid it, can you? The person's talking to you, so you can't avoid it. So that's out. Competing's not a good idea. If you said to the other person, look, I'm no longer working in that department, you've got to contact X and they'll sort it out for you. They're probably going to be a little annoyed about that. And remember, they're a customer of yours. So I don't know whether that's a good idea. Although we hear it a lot, don't we, when we ring organisations and so on, you often hear these people will actually say those things. So those 2 are probably out. Accommodation, what would be the problem if you accommodated? If you actually took the order, what would be the potential problem with that?
You upset your internal colleague.
Yes, and that's not ideal, is it? Because now I've got to take time, effort and energy to placate my person internally. And, it's just very, very difficult and not necessary. So you can see that accommodation is out. So we're basically left with only 2, compromise or competing. And I think what Natalia said was spot on. I think what I would probably do is say, look, I'll introduce you to Fred. Fred will look after that for you, and away you go. Because the trouble is, if you accommodate as well, the other problem that you've got is that person may come back to you a 3rd time or a 4th time on the assumption that they can get results. And it's harder and harder for you to say no because they keep coming back to you. And why wouldn't they if they're getting results, you see? So I would say collaboration is the way to go there. Let's have a look at number 2. I've had this happen to me, unfortunately. So I don't know whether you have, but it wasn't particularly pleasant. It's a personal one. You've had your car in for repair, and although that's the mechanics, claim it's fixed, you've got the same problem. And it's not a regular fault, and it's obvious. So you paid your bill when you collected the car, and you're not prepared to pay any more. And they're the only dealer that is at all convenient for you. But you want your car fixed properly now. So, folks, what should you do in that circumstance? Should I compete, collaborate, compromise, avoid, or accommodate? What do you think? How would you go about dealing with that situation?
Tim, I think it's a step process with this one by the sound of it. I think you need to get your message across.
Yep.
So you're assertive, you're competing.
Yes.
And that'd be the way I would handle it. So, and you're not compromising, you're not collaborating, you're not doing any of them. You're saying this is it. So I think that's where you got to start, and then what comes back at you, I think, will come in to where the next lines would probably fall into. I don't know.
Yeah, no, good answer, Gary. I think the issue here is you paid your bill. The issue here is that you know that this hasn't been fixed. So it's not like it's not a grey sort of thing. You paid your bill. So and again, this is where people make mistakes, because I think you're 100% right. I would compete. Now, competing doesn't mean go straight for the jugular. I might say to them, for example, look, I paid my bill. The problem's still there. When can you fix it, please?
Yeah, you're stating facts. You're stating facts.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You're assertive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, the red herring there is that they're obviously convenient for you, but at the end of the day, they probably know that as well. So my point is, I 100% agree with you. I would actually say, look, I paid my bill. It's not fixed. When can you fix it, please? And get into it. So, yeah, that's exactly what I did. And anyway, I won't go into that. Otherwise, I'll be here all day. We go. But look, the other thing, Gary, that you alluded to is if that doesn't work, you can then collaborate, right? And you go down. But you start now. If you started accommodating or whatever, and then all of a sudden started to compete at the end of the conversation, they're going to think you're very unreasonable. So why not start from, where you are, and then you can, I guess you could say, back down a little bit if you need to, but I think some people make that mistake. All right, let's keep moving.
Tim, the key to what you did was you used the word please. You can be competing or assertive as long as you retain good manners. You'll probably be listened to.
And in fact, you're 100% right. This is the most effective way to communicate, by being assertive, respectful.
Not aggressive.
You'll get a lot done, and people will respect that. Let's have a look at the next one. So, I went too far. Okay, now this is one in a workplace. You're a leader of a team who's currently using a manual recording system. Your analysis shows greater productivity if it's automated. Susan Jones runs the same kind of operation in another team. She disagrees with your proposition, citing customer concerns and employee resistance, plus technical problems with the system you're proposing. Your manager's told you you've got to resolve this situation with Susan because you must both run the same way. So you want an automated solution. Your colleague doesn't like that. So you both sort of got a difference of view. Your manager's telling you to sort this out with Susan. So what would be the best approach in that circumstance, do you think? At least initially. remember, this person's on equal footing with you. It's not like you can just say, look, it's my way or the highway. You can't do that because that person's a colleague of yours. What do you think?
Compromising and then move into collaborating to try and resolve it in a way that suits both of them.
Yeah. I think that I would probably collaborate, and I would probably say to Susan something along the lines of, let's try it our way for a week, and let's try it your way for another week, and then let's make a decision about by involving our teams, and let's then go and let the boss know what we've decided. I think because remember, what your relationship with Susan's important because you've got to keep working with her. But secondly, the issue is important because your boss has told you you've got to fix it. So I think that's perfectly reasonable. You certainly can't avoid it. And you can't, and I don't think you should accommodate, because at the end of the day, your solution might be better than Susan's, you see? So I would probably sit down with Susan and say, we've got to sort this out. Are you willing to work with me to see if we can come up with a solution that that we're all happy with? So I think that'd be my answer to that one. Just mindful.
Sometimes, Tim, if you find young people in both teams who are good with, receptive to technology and good with the use of it, you might go, let's get these two people to test this. And therefore it's not Susan and you, it's two young people looking at it going, we've made this work, it's very good.
Yes, because Susan's got some concerns about the technical aspects of it and so forth. So I think if we can allay Susan's concerns about it, we're more likely to get our own way. So that could be a collaboration as well.
Yep.
Well done. Okay, let's go on to the next one. The next one's a doozy, and I don't know whether any of you have had experience in this area, but it happens more often than we'd like to think. Your boss has a personal dislike for one of your team, and is insisting you not renew their contract. So whilst you recognise some occasional problems, you can manage that quite easily, and that person is in fact important to the team output. So in this situation, what do you do? So this might be you're in a car, or there might be you're having a coffee with your boss and say, oh, just make sure you don't renew that person's contract because they're a pain in the backside. So some throwaway line has come back at you. So the question is, how do you respond to your boss if that happened, which would be a reasonable, what would you do in that circumstance? What would be the best way to, I know, look, it's got a lot to do with your relationship with the boss, obviously. It's got a lot to do with their, I guess, the way they express that. It's got a lot to do with whoever this person is as well. But I think the bottom line is they can do the job. They're probably a bit of a pain in the backside. What's your response going to be? Now, let's look at what you wouldn't do. Believe it or not, it's possible to avoid this. If you think your boss has just had a hard day and or she's making some comment and you think it's just a throwaway line and they're not fair income, you might just leave it. And of course, if they bring it up again, you can't avoid it. So it's there. A second thing that you can't, I guess you can't do is you shouldn't accommodate, should you, in this circumstance? You shouldn't just say, righto, and then go over to Fred or Mary and basically not renew their contract. Why isn't that a good idea? You'll please the boss, but what'll happen?
It again.
Yeah, you're gonna have a mutiny on your hands because your team's going to go, well, hang on, if that's how you back your team, what do you say about me behind my back?
Now you're obviously the captain of the team, so you got to lead your team. Your captain doesn't do that.
Exactly. So you don't want to accommodate.
No.
Could you collaborate? Yeah, absolutely, I guess, but I wouldn't be using this too early. because a collaboration might be, for example, moving that person to another site so they have no exposure to your boss. Well, that sounds great, but what about the person themselves? They've been disadvantaged for no good reason, or they might not want to do that. So you've got that problem to deal with then. So I think I personally feel that competing would be the right way here. I think it'd be now it depends on your relationship, obviously, your boss. But if you said to your boss, look, I know you've got a personal dislike, but the key thing is it's personal. The person's actually quite effective at what they're doing, and I'm the team leader, and I just simply can't go ahead and do that on the basis of your personal dislike for that person. Now,
I'd ask Tim, why do they? I would ask, what is it? What has this person done that has got your backup? And get them talking. I want to understand why the boss wants me to do this.
Yes.
And often in articulating it, they might go, "Oh well." You can find out, is this a misplaced, is it someone of a different style that they don't, that rubs them up the wrong way? We have a saying of attack the issue, not the person, and different from ain't wrong. And we try and drive that in terms of values. So I'd like to know, why does this boss hold this opinion about this person? What have they done?
Yeah.
And often,
yes,
that's the way into a compromise, or even the boss going, well, you could ask the boss, I'm running this team, and that person has my confidence, and I'd like you to give me the same confidence, please.
Yes, but after a conversation, it'd be a bit easier.
I want to try and understand first.
Absolutely. I like it. Yes.
Ask and listen. I used to be highly competitive, but now I'm older. I've learned to ask and listen. It avoids half the crap that gets thrown at me.
Yes. It's true, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, so I think probably in this case, I agree, Andrew. I think perhaps I could talk to them about that, but the bottom line is it's a personal dislike.
Yes.
It's not a professional issue.
No.
It's not like they can't do the job.
No.
And you now here's something I want to ask you, and this is an interesting question. If you've had that conversation with the boss, and let's say that you've asserted the need to keep that person, do you have a responsibility then to say to Fred or Mary, I've just had a conversation with my boss, and just understand you've got a bit of a target on your back. You need to pull your head in. I'm in two minds about this. Should you or shouldn't you? It's difficult, isn't it?
I would handle it. I wouldn't do that straight up.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go to Mary or whoever it is straight up and let them know that, because the boss has still only just made an assumption, or, it's not fact until you gather your facts and then understand his position or the boss's position. Then you may, address Mary or Fred or whoever it may be. I wouldn't do it straight away.
No, good, Gary. Anyone else got an opinion about it? It's a tricky one.
Yes, because it might be that it's the boss that needs to have the mirror held up in front of them, so they grow and learn and develop more tolerance.
Yep.
Gary's right. You need to ask and find out, why does the boss hold this opinion? And then you might have to make a call on helping your boss become a better person.
Yeah. Well, that's another avenue.
Absolutely, yeah. So I like it. I think the pros of actually letting that person know is out of courtesy.
Yes.
But the cons about that, they could get their backup. And by the way, it might be a private conversation you've had between the boss and yourself anyway. So I can see both sides of that. And maybe Gary's way of delaying that, if necessary, is probably the way to go. Because
got to understand the situation.
It's funny you should use that word delaying, Tim, because when I said earlier, I'm looking for the number 6. That's probably the delaying tactic, the delay, whether or not that's avoiding or whatnot. But I've been sitting here all this past hour thinking, there's more to this, and I think you can obviously delay a decision, and that's probably a perfect one when you just said then this scenario you've just brought up now, where you could absolutely delay it. You're not avoiding it. All those you're not doing, you're actually delaying, and until you maybe gather more facts.
Yeah.
And you're asking and pondering, trying to work out the situation. You said it earlier, Tim, you've got to understand the situation, and that's what where's this boss coming from? Are they okay, or is he a nasty bit, or she a nasty bit of work?
Yeah, the avoiding one is a delaying strategy too, by the way. So remember, you can avoid it initially and then come back to it later. That's still avoiding, but you're not, it doesn't mean avoiding like I'm not going to deal with it at all. It just means I'm going to give myself time and space. So that's that 6th one in that avoiding, I think. So, all right, folks, I'll go back to my slides now, and I think time's got the better of us now. I'm just going to sort out, just go here and just sort of summarize. These sessions are short, sharp, and hopefully get straight to the point. But I think the key points here are fairly obvious. Be flexible. And I'm hoping that if nothing else out of this, you'll just realize that, hang on, I've got more opportunities here to deal with this than I probably thought. Don't overuse your preferred style, because just because you're comfortable with it doesn't mean that it's the right way to go. And I guess the most important point out of all of this today is, if plan A doesn't work, look for a plan B, look for a plan C, D, and so on. And I think that's where this model is very, very useful. So I'd say to you that homework is, if you haven't already done so, complete the profile. I've sent it to you. You just have to click on that link, complete the profile, and that gives you a sense of where you sit. Now, it's not a perfect profile, and obviously you're putting in the information, so you could be open to bias there. But at the end of the day, it just gives you a sense of how you might deal with a range of different situations and what you might. And if you're wondering what a high score is, 10, 11, and 12 is classified as a high score. You can't get any higher than 12. And perhaps a 2, 1, or 0. That would suggest that if you get a 10, 11, and 12, you're overusing something. And then a 2, 1, or a 0 would suggest that you're not using it enough. And then, of course, as of now, walking away today, you just start practicing these 5 things and start getting good at having conversations around those 5 particular parameters in the right place at the right time. Good. And then next week, we're going to look at meetings and facilitating great meetings. And I don't know about you, but I just think there's a massive opportunity for us to actually improve the quality of our meetings, and it's not hard. And I've got a lot of great ideas that'll help you that are very practical. So we'll get to that next week. Anything else, folks, before we wrap up?
Tim, I have a board meeting next week, so I apologise. I will watch it later, and I can attend the last 2. I'm sorry to be rude, but I had pre-booked meetings with, half a dozen directors. I can't. They're all over the bloody place. I can't change them.
No, that's all good.
So I'm sorry about that.
That's good for letting me know. All right, folks, thank you. Have a great week, and we'll catch up next Friday, and we'll launch into looking at having great meetings and some of the tips and hints on how to make meetings more interactive, have, not just as static reporting processes, which they often are, as you know. All right, thanks, everyone. All the best.
Thanks, Tim.
Catch you next week.
Thank you,
everybody.
Bye, guys.
Cheers.